Waiting is something that is difficult. I think this goes for all of us. This last week, I experienced this, and maybe you did too, with the United States election, waiting for the results to come in. I know I updated or refreshed my browser very often to see if there was any new news. Closer to home here, we have a waiting going on as this coronavirus pandemic continues. We wait to get back to normal. Waiting is hard, it's difficult for all of us, it can be a tense experience. Today's gospel, taken from Matthew chapter 25, about the wise and foolish virgins, is all about waiting. That waiting somehow is central to what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And more importantly than this, the tension of waiting can be an opportunity actually for us to grow. Waiting really is central to what it means to follow Christ. One of our main beliefs, as we say in the Creed, is that we await for Jesus to come back to judge the living and the dead. The Greek word for this is parousia, which means the coming or the visitation. We're all waiting for Jesus to arrive, to come back. We don't know, of course, when this is going to happen. Jesus himself tells us that he doesn't know the date when he is going to return. Only the Father knows. St. Paul and other early Christians believed that, okay, maybe Jesus was going to come back in their generation. But whether we were these early Christians or even Christians today, the important part is that we have this characteristic or attitude of heart that we're ready for Jesus to come back whenever. We're always ready for Christ to return, whether it be tomorrow or 1,000 years from now. It's important that we are always ready for Jesus to come. Being ready for Jesus to arrive as we're waiting for him to come means that we need to be prepared. This is the central message, I think, of the gospel today of the wise and foolish virgins. Oftentimes when I was in university, I would cram for exams, and this sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. But the gospel makes it clear that we cannot cram for Jesus' arrival. We need to be prepared. The foolish virgins were foolish because they were not prepared. They didn't have the proper oil bought in advance. They were not prepared with the oil, so their lamps were not ready to be lit when when Jesus Christ came back. The wise virgins were those who made preparations, were those who had bought oil in advance. So Jesus teaches us in the gospel that as we're waiting, in this tension for waiting, we need to prepare ourselves to meet Christ. This means we need to have our oil prepared. Now, a great kind of point of contention or debate in this gospel today is, what does this oil refer to? What is this oil that we need to buy? Well, it's not clear from the gospel today, and many different explanations are given. But one thing that is clear is that this oil is something that we personally need to get for ourselves. Kind of a startling feature of this gospel is that the wise virgins are unable to give their oil to the foolish virgins. So somehow each one of us must prepare personally, must acquire this oil for ourselves. Some people say that this oil refers to faith. Another kind of quite convincing interpretation is taken from the context in which we find this gospel. So this gospel from Matthew 25 is found in the context of other parables talking about the judgment. And at the end of Matthew 25, we see that very important scene or parable in which Jesus talks about how the king ultimately will separate the sheep from the goats. And the criteria of this final judgment is how we did or did not act to those who were in need. And whatever we did to the needy around us, we are told that we did to Jesus Christ himself. So perhaps this oil that Jesus is referring to are kind actions, sacrifices that we do for those who are in need around us. This then is a great message from this gospel. In this tension of waiting, it's a time for us to be prepared to meet Christ, to grow, to acquire oil for ourselves, which can be faith, but this oil also we get by doing acts of sacrifice, kindness, love, giving to those who are in need, because when we do that, we give to Jesus himself. Each and every day is an opportunity for us to get some of this oil for ourselves, to do some acts of kindness and love to those around us. This parable is really a call to action to decide here and now to do something, to prepare ourselves when we're in this tension of waiting. And we can, of course, do this during the pandemic. Now, recently, we heard that there are new restrictions that are there in place to hopefully kind of reduce the amounts of coronavirus that we're having here locally. This makes things difficult. These new sacrifices, these new regulations that are in place can be a bit gloomy, a bit kind of a sad time for us, a lonely time. But as Christians, really, we receive a lot of grace from Jesus, not just the grace to kind of face these challenges, but also the grace to face these challenges with the correct attitude, the correct perspective. This time during the coronavirus is an opportunity for us to sacrifice for others, to give to others, and thereby getting oil for ourselves in our life. So I'd like to just maybe suggest a couple ways that we can approach this challenging time of the coronavirus. One is the attitude with which we make these sacrifices or the attitude with which we approach these new restrictions. As Christians, we're very much accustomed to Jesus' teaching that we can make sacrifices, kind of accept difficulties in our life for the good of others, especially the weak and those who suffer. So when we approach these new restrictions, we can have that attitude. It's a very Christian attitude that we accept these restrictions out of love, we accept these sacrifices out of love for the good of those around us. Another way that we can approach this coronavirus is by giving to those around us of our time, especially by reaching out to those who might feel lonely or isolated. With these new regulations, people won't be able to contact with each other in the same way. So this aspect of loneliness, which is already common at this time when it's dark, there's a lot of rain here in Vancouver, will only grow for many people. And each of us probably will experience loneliness in this time as well. But the gospel, I think, is a challenge for us to recognize that one way we can get this oil, we can prepare ourselves to meet Jesus, is by reaching out to those who are alone and isolated, by talking to them on the phone. And this, of course, has the added benefit that when we reach out to those who are lonely, when we talk with them, we can eliminate our own loneliness and isolation as well. Finally, we see that in this gospel, the great image is this oil is meant to be burnt to produce light, to kind of scatter the darkness that is around. So during this time, especially during the corona pandemic, we have this opportunity to create or get oil for ourselves in our life by making sacrifices for those around us, by reaching out to those who might be lonely. And in doing this, we get oil for ourselves, so we're ready to meet Jesus, but even this oil will burn in our lives so that we can truly become the light of the world to those around us, especially at this time where there might be a sense of greater darkness than usual. God bless you and take care.